Tonight, Labour take on the NIMBYs as they go for growth. Rachel Reeves, the new Chancellor, says she's going to get Britain building again by overhauling the planning system. That means more houses and more onshore wind farms. Starmer's whirlwind of meetings and phone calls continues as the new Prime Minister welcomes his new MPs to Westminster. But for how long will the honeymoon last? I'll be asking the new Science, Innovation and Technology Secretary, Peter Kyle. President Biden calls into morning cable TV to insist he is not going anywhere. We'll be live in Paris as the political deadlock following last night's election results continues. And as the UK's new Prime Minister gets ready for his big first appearance on the global stage at the NATO summit this week, we'll ask if his fellow leaders are looking on enviously at his new majority. All that and more with Saeed Avasi and Jim Murphy, who will be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge, live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, they're not hanging about, are they? A full cabinet, flow of policy announcements, a speech from the Chancellor, and a tour of all four nations by the Prime Minister. No time to sit in a dark room, pour a stiff drink and recover after the general election campaign. Now, to be honest, you can see why. The incoming Labour government has built almost their entire economic strategy around one thing: growth. If you ask them how they can possibly improve public services without putting up taxes or breaking their fiscal rules, that is the answer they give: growth. But the problem is, it's quite hard to get growth. You can't just click your fingers and it comes. And it's also unpredictable. It's a bit like when I try and follow a recipe. I put in all the right ingredients, but I'm never sure what's going to emerge at the end and also exactly what it's going to taste like either. And it's the same with growth. You can do all the right things, but a big international event or an unpredictable national crisis happens, and that changes everything. Every government wants growth, but it's not that easy. So you can see why Labour is not hanging around. Today, Rachel Reeves is pulling out all the stops to try and get growth back into the economy. She's bringing back house building targets, overhauling the planning system, ending the ban on onshore wind farms. And they need it to work, because without growth, they've got a big hole in their economic plans. Well, let's now hear from Sky's economics and data editor, Ed Conway, with tonight's first report.
A new era begins, a new Chancellor, a new agenda, and she's keen to get a move on.
We have promised a new approach to growth, ending the absurd ban on new onshore wind in England, create a new task force to accelerate stalled housing sites. We will also reform the planning system.
For her first major speech, Rachel Reeves gathered business leaders to hear her pledge. She wants to get the country growing again and building again. But that raises a question.
When can people, particularly those who are nervous about having all this building happening, when can they expect more economic growth? Is that something that you might expect in a few years, by the end of this parliamentary term?
It's all fine to say that you want growth. Everyone wants growth. But you've got to will the means and not just the ends. You've got to take some of the difficult decisions. Those difficult decisions have been ducked and dived and deferred for the last 14 years. I think you can see today that I mean business. We're getting on with the work that's needed to unlock that growth.
New housing targets, more energy infrastructure. Strictly speaking, there wasn't a lot that was actually brand new here. But for business leaders, what really matters is that they think there's a chance this time around it might actually happen.
The fact that they are planning to bring forward legislation and action on this before even the recess, it's not the novelty of the ideas, it's the desire to execute them, which I think investors will hear and which is very welcome.
So why is Labour quite so focused on economic growth? Well, have a look at this chart. This shows you GDP, the level of gross domestic product in the UK, how wealthy we are. You can see the pandemic there. We've kind of bounced back since then. But now compare us to the OECD, so the rest of the rich world, and there's a big gap opening up, 6.3%. If you turn that into the amount per person, it's over £2,000. And the impact on the public finances, £58 billion in lost tax receipts.
For this business in Walsall, making electronic components, the energy transition is a big potential opportunity. The problem is Britain isn't on the front foot.
It's been fairly sluggish the last 12 months with high interest rates, the cost of finance have held back projects. So I think most UK manufacturers are in this sort of state at the moment where we need something to happen to get the economy moving again.
The choice of housing and building on this Chancellor's first big day is hardly accidental. But it's hardly the only challenge facing her. Weak growth, strained public finances and long-standing holes in government spending. Her work has only just begun. Ed Conway, Sky News.
Well, Ed joins us now. Ed, what did you make of Rachel Reeves' first big speech then?
Well, I mean, it was kind of interesting. Well, actually, is interesting the right word? It was kind of, in one sense, it was desperately boring because the topic it covers, planning, is boring, and actually, in a sense, it was intentionally boring. I was thinking back to 1997 when Gordon Brown, straight after the election, in that very same room that you just saw Rachel Reeves in, announced that the Bank of England was going to be made independent. It was kind of a big bang thing. This time around, I think there's an acknowledgement that it's not like you can do big bang things. You need to do this kind of hard work of execution and making things happen. And planning is like the ultimate example of that. You don't just press a button and suddenly sort it out. But there was also, I mean, I want to just do like a quick coda to that chart I just showed in the piece to camera there, because so this was basically the commissioned work from the Treasury. So alongside the announcements today from Rachel Reeves, there was this talk about, well, I've commissioned work from the Treasury, and it's shown there's this big gap between the UK and the OECD. But then I could have thought to myself, well, hang on, if you also look at other countries like the EU, because the OECD, that black line there, that's got places like the US in it, it's got places like Turkey in it, it's got Brazil, it's got kind of quite fast-growing economies. So it's not entirely comparable. If you then compare the UK to the EU, it's actually completely the opposite story. So the UK, same thing. Okay, so that line is basically GDP, the kind of, you know, how well off all of these economies are, kind of going back to the same period, going back to the start of 2010. And actually, it turns out, compared to the rest of the EU, the UK is a bit better off. And I guess, you know, it just underlines the fact that we're not a total outlier when it comes to our economy. There are big problems, and it's worth saying, yes, some of the problems in Europe just started during the Euro crisis. But even so, there are big problems we all share, and actually bridging that gap and getting growth going, that's something that's going to be quite tricky for us to do, because we you know, energy is really expensive. We have some of the same issues that they do in Europe. So it's going to be tough, I think, for Rachel Reeves to pull this off. And
it feels like we shouldn't judge them now. It's only fair to wait for the day to come in. But like you say, it's not that easy. No,
but there will be more to come, and we're going to hear more about, you know, there's a big report they've got about how they can raise money from the private sector. We've yet to hear anything on, you know, taxes and spending. So it is early days, but as I say, it was kind of an intentionally boring thing to start with, but one that might actually bear fruit in a few years' time.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. I put Ed's chart, this one actually, to our Labour guest this evening as well, so worth sticking around to find out what that happens. Well, while Rachel Reeves was commissioning that Treasury analysis, presenting a bit of a dimmer view of UK growth than is perhaps the case, her boss, the Keir Starmer, was continuing his tour of all four nations of the UK, visiting Northern Ireland this morning and Wales this afternoon. Sky's deputy political editor, Sam Coates, reports.
Meet the supermajority.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Keir Starmer's whopping 411-strong team of MPs. Over 200 of them here for the first time. The start of a new term can always be a bit awkward for some. But little wonder he looks so pleased to see them.
I don't know what I told you.
It's been a day of handshakes and small talk for the new Prime Minister. A visit to Stormont, the second stop on his tour of the nations, promising leaders here a new approach and a better Brexit deal.
A different relationship with the EU, a different way of doing politics, and we go forward in that spirit.
First Minister. From Hamdar, good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Then to Wales, wrapping his arms around a Labour First Minister who lost a confidence vote just weeks ago.
Here in Wales, it's particularly important because what I said before the election is that a Labour government would be a game changer because you would have a UK government working with the Welsh government, delivering for Wales rather than the conflict that I think we've seen too much of over the last 14 years.
It's not just the Prime Minister not pausing to draw breath. The whole government keen to look hyperactive. There's the Chancellor's speech on growth, the Foreign Secretary in Europe, the Defence Secretary in Ukraine, the Health Secretary meeting the Dentists Union, and the Home Secretary out on the beat.
Thank you.
That kind of public reaction doesn't tend to last long into government.
Hello, Mark. You all right?
And the reality of ruling is harder than photo opportunities. Prisons are near breaking point. Will criminals be let out early to ease the crisis?
I'm extremely concerned with the legacy that the Conservatives have left us with on prisons. All of those things are going to need to be addressed and to be fixed. And the Prime Minister has said there isn't going to be a quick fix, but we're going to have to deal with the legacy that we inherit.
After a straightforward campaign, now Labour wants you to see a flurry of activity. But the difficult decisions are piling up. Labour's got a record 411 MPs, half of whom are here in Westminster for the first time. And they are going to want to demonstrate measurable change, not least to ensure that voters return them again in 5 years' time.
With this many people lining up behind him, Keir Starmer has a blank cheque to reshape British politics. But the public voted for change and will demand results. Will they always be this keen to be seen with him? Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
Now we've got a bit of breaking news to bring you now. Who's in, who's out of the interim Conservative shadow cabinet? So we're getting used to that. Well, our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is with us. John, what's happening?
Well, the big names who are out are Lord Cameron, no longer not going to be shadow foreign secretary. As far as we know, not even a spokesman on foreign affairs in the Lords. And the person who masterminded, if that's the right word, or certainly presided over the campaign, the former chairman, as we can now call him, Richard Holden, who controversially carpet-bagged off to Essex and won by 20 votes. He's out as well. I'll tell you about his letter in a second. Some of these are quite predictable. Jeremy Hunt, Shadow Chancellor, and Oliver Dowden will be Shadow Deputy Leader. Andrew Mitchell, Foreign Affairs, Clever Lee, Home Secretary. James Cartledge becomes Defence Secretary because Grant Shapps lost his seat. Ed Arger, who was a Justice Minister, he's Shadow Secretary of State for Justice. Shadow Secretary of State for Science, Andrew Griffiths, so that's a move up for him. Victoria Atkins stays at Health. Kemi Badenoch moves to Shadow Angela Rayner as Levelling Up Secretary. Steve Barclay stays. Chris Philp is the new Shadow Leader of the Commons. Lord True stays as Leader in the Lords. Kevin Hollingrake, who basically had applied for the job on Sky News this morning, Shadow Business Secretary. Energy, Claire Coutinho. Mel Stride, yes. Damien Hines, Education. Helen Whately, Transport. Julia Lopez, Culture. Jeremy Wright, Shadow Attorney General. Northern Ireland, Alex Burghardt. Scotland, John Lamont. I think that's probably enough, isn't it? Lord Davies is the Shadow Welsh Secretary, of course, because they don't have any MPs. Let me tell you about...
I want to know.
Yeah.
Come on, let's get to the letter. What's happening here?
Oh, dear. It's quite a long letter from Richard Holden. He talks about continuing to support the party, and he says the process for choosing a new leader will be determined by the executive of the 22 committee, assisted by CCHQ. Now, they're going to elect a chair next week, we understand. Or it might even be this week, actually. The PLP are electing next week. But listen to this. While there is obviously the need for stability and continuity during that period, there's also the need to simultaneously have a thorough review of the general election campaign. While I will obviously feed into that, this would best take place with a new set of eyes to help provide the clearest view. Therefore, that process should happen under new party chairman, and I will step aside as soon as you confirm a replacement. And the new interim party chairman is Richard Fuller, not particularly well-known figure, North Bedfordshire MP. So he's put out some words as well. But you could say that Richard Holden has paid the price for what many have said is a disastrous campaign. And David Cameron, who probably thought he'd be in the job for a year as Foreign Secretary, off to that, what do they call that shed in his garden?
The Shepherd's Hut.
Shepherd's Hut, that's the one, yeah.
John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there. Well, we've been talking about the shadow cabinet. We can talk now about the cabinet because a short time ago I spoke to the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Peter Kyle. Great to have you on the programme.
Thank you.
Congratulations on the election win and also, of course, your appointment. Has it sunk in yet?
Well, it simultaneously, it has sunk in because we're so deep already, working all weekend, over the programme for government, implementation plans, making sure that we can get the right things cracking from day one. But simultaneously, I wake up every morning thinking that the previous day was a dream because it was just so special and so remarkable. the privilege that we've been given and I've been given by the public and by the Prime Minister is something that I take incredibly seriously. I am loving every second. I feel energised by it. And I'm just very, very pleased to be able to sit in a government department with thousands of civil servants and start changing the direction of it, set new priorities, and start working on how to get things delivered for the public who have expectations of us as a government.
Well, you're not hanging around. Rachel Reeves' speech today promised to get Britain building, more houses, more wind farms. Is this the war on the NIMBY?
No, it's not the war on the NIMBY. What this is central government using its power assertively but respectfully to get things moving. We made pledges in the election campaign, and already today you're seeing them being honoured. So, for example, I heard during the election campaign and in the run-up to it that there was a data centre that was a private sector investment, but it was turned down for planning because one minister didn't like the look of it from the M25. So we have today called that in. We will have another look at that. We're not going to prejudge the outcome, but we will have a look at that. This is something that is technically in Greenbelt, but it's currently being used as a metal scrapyard. This would create hundreds of millions of pounds worth of investment in building it, but it would create hundreds and hundreds of million pounds of investment into the long term, perhaps billions of pounds into our economy, and building the data infrastructure of the future. So we want to make sure that we are a government that is breaking down barriers to investment, not putting them up as the previous one did.
I'm really interested in this. You said there that this is a central government that needs to be robust, effectively,
yes,
to push things through. But you're also saying that this is a government that wants to decentralise, that
yes,
believes in localism. I'm just trying to work out in my head how those two things can be true. You're prepared to override local concerns to get Britain building. You want to classify wind farms as a nationally significant infrastructure, so Miliband effectively gets to approve them, not local councils. You're talking about the data centres there, and I did, Angela Rayner writing to local mayors to make sure any investment opportunity with important planning considerations should be brought to her attention, as well as Rachel Reeves. It doesn't sound to me like this is a decentralising government. It sounds to me like you want to make sure that actually you don't trust local decision makers to get the decisions right.
I don't think that the two are in conflict. A central government getting things done and respecting power where it is outside of Westminster. So where there is, there is metro mayors, there are regions, there is local authorities, and there are countries in the United Kingdom.
So why is Angela Rayner writing to local mayors to say, actually, you know what, just pass these things across my desk just to make sure you come to the right decision?
What we want to do is make sure that these are partnerships, rather than always working against each other, that they are partnerships. Now, there are some local authorities who want to build things, but they've been prevented from doing so, including onshore wind farms. Some local authorities have wanted to do it, but it is the central government that's been the block to it. What we're saying is, not only are we going to lift the block, we will be an assertive partner on your behalf to try and get these things done. Because we have just won an election, and this was in our manifesto. There are expectations that when it comes to the infrastructure of the future, whether it be digital, whether it be water and gas, which we've seen a lot of problems with as well, or whether it is the energy of the future, that we will be a government that uses the power that we have. We want local authorities to use the power they have, but there is a very particular power that comes with a Westminster government that has just won a decisive victory on a manifesto that promises these kind of changes.
It sounds like you are prepared to override local concerns then, aren't you? You are, aren't you?
No, as I say, there are powers that central government has that other parts of government don't have, and we will use those powers when it is in the national interest.
AI, of course, big part of the growth strategy, big responsibility for you as well. You said previously that AI could contribute 0.5% to growth. Is that still what you think?
Well, that's not what I said. That's actually what the OBR said. So the Office of Budget Responsibility, after the autumn statement, just before Christmas, released in their official data that if digital technology was used throughout the economy, currently available digital technology was used throughout the economy in the way it's being used in parts of the economy, it would add 0.5% to national productivity and by year 5 create £72 billion worth of fiscal headroom for the Exchequer. Now, when I saw that, I thought, that is the potential that's out there in the economy right now. I want to go and get it and exploit it, put it to use for our country, for our Exchequer, our public services and investment. But I also thought to myself, well, there is a current Secretary of State and a current government. They've been told by the OBR that it's on the table, and they look the other way. Well, we're not going to look the other way. We're going to be out there seeing how we can safely deploy AI. Today, that I've already announced that we will be creating the digital centre of government by bringing together digital services from across government, creating a very powerful centre that can not just assess what the technology that's out there and bring it into government and our public services, because an ordinary Briton at the moment is spending over a week every year dealing with government bureaucracy. Why, in a digital age, is that possible? So we want to make sure we can make benefits there, but also conversely, see what digital technology is out there and make sure that we can be an active partner as a government to get it to all parts of the economy so that everybody can start benefiting from it.
There's a lot of people who are worried about AI as well. I was quite struck by what you said previously about social media, about kind of digital things. You said that actually regulation hadn't really kept up. I mean, is there a risk that the same is going to happen on AI?
There is that risk, which is why I was very clear with my words a second ago to say safely deploy. Safety has to be baked into everything we do as a government, and the previous government, safety was lost control of, whether it was women and girls outside
Don't worry
after
about
dark,
them.
or
You
whether it was online.
guys are in charge
Yeah, so we
now.
have to get a grip back on safety, and I want to reassure people that the AI Safety Institute we will keep and we will invest in, and we will make sure that actually it's put to greater use, I believe, going forward than it is even now. But safety will be there from the outset, and we will reassure the public that AI can be safely deployed. And where there is technologies and AI is used in ways that aren't safe, we will act assertively. We have very high expectations of tech companies, and I've spoken to their bosses, both here in the UK, Europe, and I went over to California and Seattle earlier in the year, and I said to them, we want to benefit from the products that they are creating. We want to benefit from the investment that they could potentially have in our economy. But they must make sure that their products are safe, and if not, you will find a very assertive government that will tackle it.
We talk about growth. We're talking about Rachel Reeves' plans on building, your plans on AI. It feels to me like your whole, in many ways, economic strategy is pinned by this desire to get growth. Keir Starmer indicated in the election campaign he wants growth of 2.5%. That's pretty ambitious, some would say. I mean, look, the OBR is forecasting 1.9% next year, 2% in 2026. IMF are even more gloomy. They don't think it would rise above 1.7% over the next parliament. So is it, I guess some would say, is this almost a bit of a fantasy?
This is potential, Sophie. We're looking at the economy. We are proud of Britain. We think it has potential that is untapped. And we're trying to guess how much potential is out there and how realistically we can unlock it. All of the things we talked about...
This is my whole point. Is it realistic? I mean, we can see here, these are the GDP projections. You can see the UK. It's basically been tracking the rest of the EU as well. All governments want growth. You can't just click your fingers and get it.
But Sophie, what you're doing, you just told me not to mention the previous government, but what you're doing is using the failures of the previous government as an assumption.
And the whole of the EU as
well. Let's be really clear about this, because Treasury figures released today show that if the British economy over the last 14 years, since 2010, had grown at the same average as the OECD...
This is my point here, though, because the OECD includes countries with very, very different economies to ours. If you look at the EU, we've effectively been tracking, actually doing a bit better, to be honest, on growth than the rest of the EU.
But the EU is 27 nations, which also has countries and economies that are very, very different from ours. Our economy is diverse, it is global, we have services and manufacturing. We have huge potential in it. There is lots we can do to unlock it. When I say unlock it, government can break down barriers to private sector investment. That's what we will be doing. So don't just judge us on the failures of the last Tory government. Also look about the previous 13 years under Labour, when there was 2.5% average growth. Why aren't we judging ourselves on that and setting that as our aspiration?
You had just finally, you had a decent gig at the weekend, presenting the British Grand Prix trophy to Lewis Hamilton at the Formula One. How'd you manage to get that gig?
Well, they actually called up and the photograph is there, and I try not to look at it because it was like such an amazing moment for me.
I can see from your face.
So what you have to understand is when they called me and said, would I, on Saturday afternoon, late afternoon, would I go there tomorrow and present a trophy? I asked them, is this some little trophy that they're going to give for the best gear change or something? And they said, no, it's the winner's trophy to the winner. I've been to Silverstone 5 times and sat on Club Corner on a grassy bank. Twice it was pouring with rain and I slid down in the mud. So when people were coming up to me, these bigwigs in the motor industry, saying, is this your first Grand Prix? I said, no, I've done this the hard way. I put in the hard graft before getting here. That was an amazing thing to do. And also it was an incredible race. And to have Lewis Hamilton, on behalf of Britain, winning the British Grand Prix for his first time in 3 years, it was just the most amazing thing to do. And to get that conversation with him when I could express on behalf of our country the pride we have in him was just an amazing thing to be able to do. And that is one of the things you can do when you win an election.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sophie.
Well, listening to you, that was our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam, it feels kind of like day one at school vibes here. How do you think the new government has been getting on?
I was quite struck by something that Peter Carl just said to you, where he said it was safety first was the priority. And he was talking, obviously, in the context of AI, but there is just a little sense of that today. A blizzard of activity, as you saw in the film a few minutes ago. But the question is what we are seeing yet convincingly transformative? What Keir Starmer and his team seem to be doing is setting a direction, but it's not quite clear to me how you get all the points away towards basically the end point where missions are delivered. He's given first steps, but not where you go from there. And I think that that's kind of critical. And I think everybody's trying to respond. Now, on one level, it is just a mark of confidence that a new government doesn't feel like it needs to bow to media pressure, issue 1,000 press releases that change a lot of things immediately. We shouldn't think just because there ain't a lot of specifics that that's necessarily a bad thing. The public, I suspect, will give them time. But the question is it using this time wisely? I certainly think the Tories are going to spend some time struggling to adjust to a new political tempo. That's what this reshuffle that Rishi Sunak's done this evening does. And certainly looking at some of their heavyweights backing out, like Lord Cameron, you do wonder just how much some of them are up for the fight.
Yeah, what did you think about the reshuffle, Sam? What was your sort of take on that?
Lord Cameron not up for the hard yards of opposition. Kemi Badenoch, who obviously we're paying very close attention to, now shadowing Angela Rayner. That looks like a role that does actually look like a promotion. It puts her up against one of the biggest figures in government, sets her up for something. Is that a hint from Rishi Sunak there? And goodbye to Rick Holden, the Conservative Party chair, who's decided to step down. It's the reshuffle that Rishi Sunak has essentially had to do because he has so few cards to play. He's effectively reappointed most people in his job. Actually, that's what Keir Starmer did on Friday with his shadow cabinet. But it's something where you just get the sense it's done from a place of low energy and, not a great deal of vim and vigour and enthusiasm because the landscape has changed. And so the Tories have to respond to it in an environment where there's not going to be a huge amount of attention.
Thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates, our Deputy Political Editor. Well, Sam was just saying the landscape has changed, and it certainly have. Look at that. These are just the Labour MPs. It's actually astonishing when you see it all like that, isn't it? It just really gives you a sense of how Parliament has transformed in just a few days. The new class photo of all the Labour MPs elected. Right, let's bring in our duo for tonight's show with the former Conservative Party chair, Baroness Varsi, and the former Scotland Secretary, Jim Murphy. How does it make you feel seeing all those Labour MPs elected?
Brings back a lot of memories. I remember this similar photograph back in '97 when I was in my 20s, and I think probably in the same room. And those folks will just be packed with excitement and just trying to work out where to get in office and how to do the job. So I think it's a really exciting moment for their families. I think the country's going to have to get used to no longer being as fascinated by the palace intrigue of the Conservative Party. I mean, bluntly, we haven't really had a government in recent years. We've had people squabbling with one another. And I think for the problem for the Conservatives is I think they've only got 27 new MPs. And from that number, they've got to regenerate, grow and be an alternative government. I think it is very difficult for them, particularly when you compare it to that photograph.
Sadie, your thoughts first on the new government incoming? I mean, I guess, does it bring back kind of 2010 memories at all? How do you think Keir Starmer's got off?
Well, I mean, first of all, look, huge congratulations to the Labour Party and to Keir Starmer for having such an amazing... I mean, look at that photograph, such a huge party, such a great result. And I think all credit to them for the way in which they've handled themselves from that moment. Quick appointment of cabinet meeting on Saturday morning, press conference thereafter, out into the country, and actually for the Defence Secretary out to Ukraine. It just feels like... And then Rachel Reeves' speech today, it just feels like a a new government that's just hit the ground running and is ready for business. You know, I mean, they've clearly had a long time preparing for it. You know, you've been a long time in opposition, but I think it should give us all a lot of comfort, whatever your political background is, because in the end, first and foremost, you know, our loyalty lies to the country, and you want a good, stable government. I think as far as the Conservatives are concerned, I think we need a period of silence. I don't think we need to talk about ourselves. I don't think we need to oppose. I think we just need to rebuild. I think we need to step back, take our time, work out where we want to be in 5 years' time, the kind of person we want to be leading us in 5 years' time, and really start to rebuild the party, starting with CCHQ, getting the campaigners back in, making sure that we reach across to those parts of the country and those people who still represent us, like town councillors and local councillors and county councillors, you know, reach out to all of that.
Is there a risk, though, with the period of silence? I'm thinking back to kind of 2010, where it felt like kind of Labour slightly cleared the pitch, and that allowed the Conservatives to define Labour's legacy.
I think the bigger problem for the Conservative Party isn't that period, but what happened just a couple of years ago with Liz Truss. You started the programme, didn't you, by talking about how economic growth was a little bit like one of your recipes. You need lots of ingredients. Now, Liz Truss's attempt to get economic growth had one ingredient. It was a sugar rush. It was sugar, more sugar, right-wing sugar rush. And the Labour Party's learned from that and says there's a more patient way of doing it. It's probably a less exciting way of doing it. But these sorts of things are just exactly the type of Prime Minister Keir Starmer wants to be.
I mean, some of it is a bit... I mean, I know you're going to talk about tax cuts and so on, which is the difference. But, you know, onshore wind farms, growth targets of 2.5%, it's exactly the same as Liz Truss.
No, but just think about it. Here's one example that sounds really dull, but really important. There's a company in the moment in the UK that I won't mention, trying to build a huge pipe to bring water from the north of England to the south. They've got to get planning permission through every single local authority. Each application slows it down every time because someone objects. How can that be right when it's a national infrastructure project? So those sorts of things, while not eradicating local opinion, fast-forwarding all those processes will create jobs and will be great for the economy.
And nothing that Rachel Reeves is saying is radical, even at a time of the height of austerity, actually, post-2010, when I was in Cabinet, capital investment and infrastructure spend was still considered to be an important priority because, in the end, that is what will drive. But, you know, you can talk about macro projects, which is what the infrastructure projects are, but from a micro level, as somebody who's involved in a number of SMEs, most companies will say to you, we've got the orders, we could actually be far more productive, we could produce more, we could increase our turnovers, we could add to GDP, but we simply cannot because things are getting in the way. The issues around Brexit and still challenges around how we're exporting, issues around the lack of funding that's now going into businesses now that we don't have EU money coming in, issues around planning, issues around recruitment because we can't find the staff. So if you speak to businesses up and down the country, there is a real thirst for growth. The underlying challenge there is all these various factors which could very quickly start to move if the mood in the country started to be that this is a government that's serious about delivering.
Thanks, Faith, very much indeed. More from Saida and Jim as the programme continues. Let's go to the US now, because Democrats returned to Washington today after the July the 4th weekend, a little antsy about the candidate for the presidency after a run of appearances where Joe Biden has appeared frail and occasionally confused. But President Biden came out swinging. He insisted he will not step aside, declaring in a letter to Congress that voters pick presidential nominees, not pundits, donors or the press. Fancy or not, his party don't get to decide his fate. That is up to him, and he is not going anywhere. He phoned into a morning TV news show to say so.
I wanted to make sure I was right, that the average voter out there still wanted Joe Biden. And I'm confident they do. We're not going anywhere. I am not going anywhere. I wouldn't be running if I didn't absolutely believe that I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024.
Well, there you go, President Joe Biden not going anywhere. Our US correspondent James Matthews has more from Washington.
Joe Biden channeling Donald Trump, calling in to his favourite TV cable news show. It was on MSNBC. Morning Joe, it's called. The hosts of that programme are all pals of his, and suddenly from nowhere they had him on the phone. Lasted about 15 minutes. And the president, it has to be said, was in fighting form. It was early in the morning. He sounded more cogent, and lucid, certainly, than he had done in that debate against Donald Trump. And, you know, he railed against his critics. He laid out the case for him versus Donald Trump and made the very clear point that he was going nowhere. So he will be hoping clearly that an interview like that and the fight back in general turns on its axis what is growing opposition to him. Right now, I'm in Capitol Hill, Mark. In this place, there are 9 Democrats and counting who have come out publicly against him. This is day one back after the 4th of July holiday. The fear in Team Biden will be that opposition to him solidifies and amplifies as they get together and discuss their shared concerns. Joe Biden did something else, as well as the interview. He sent a letter today to Democrats, fellow Democrats, he said, and he laid out the case for sticking with him, essentially saying that, look, I'm the guy who is the nominee. I was voted as such by the party at large. For you now to ditch me is to deny the democratic will of the party. Let me read you some of the letter he sent. This is Biden. He said to his party, I want you to know that despite all the speculation in the press and elsewhere, I am firmly committed to staying in this race, to running this race to the end, and to beating Donald Trump. I have heard the concerns, he says, that people have, their good faith fears and worries about what is at stake in this election. I am not blind to them. That's a letter from Joe Biden to Democrats at large, but specifically to Democrat representatives in this place. I've spoken to one of them who wants Biden to stand down in the past hour, and their reaction to the interview and to the letter is that it changes nothing. They remain opposed, saying that they believe in the message. They just don't think that Biden is the messenger. And on the point about denying democracy by opposing him, this individual made the point that, well, yes, we backed Biden, but we also backed Kamala Harris as part of the ticket, the vice president, of course, who's hotly tipped as a ready replacement.
James Matthews reporting there. Right, let's get the thoughts now of Saida and Jim. Saida, you think our politics is a roller coaster, and then you look at what's happening in the United States.
I mean, it's the worst of all worlds, isn't it? They have a candidate who's going to fight until the next election, and his own party and his own kind of support base is turning on him. It will be like the 1922 starting to receive letters about the Prime Minister as you're about to call a general election. I mean, it just seems to be such a difficult place. It's just, I mean, what is the options for us now in the US? You know, if you look at it from Keir's perspective, a Prime Minister in the UK would want to be dealing with President Biden, however frail, however unsteady and all the rest of it, as opposed to Trump, who might be slightly fitter, but is he fit for office?
I think the UK probably is going to have the most stable politics and most stable political environment of any major economy or any major democracy in the world. When you look at what's happening in France and Germany and Spain and Italy and the US, I hope with all my heart that the Democrats can beat Trump. Who America picks to be its president, it's business. But the truth is, for the sake of the people of Ukraine, for the sake of geopolitical stability, for the sake of so much else, I hope Trump's defeated. But I worry that if Biden holds on, that Trump may win. And I hope in that context I'm wrong, but I fear I'm right.
Would you like him to stand down then, you think?
Yeah, I love Joe Biden. I absolutely love him. I think he's achieved so much. Even in this short term as president, he's achieved so much. But he showed in that TV debate that he's just not got it. And we're talking about someone who's going to be the leader of the free world 4 years from now. So my personal view is, if he's not fit last week, he's not really going to be any more vim and vigour in 4 years' time. So regrettably, my personal view is that they have to find someone better.
Thanks both very much indeed.
Thank you.
Coming up next on the Politics Hub.
This is the White House Situation Room, heading to connect Prime Minister Starmer to President Biden. You are now connected to Air Force One.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome to Big School. Was this the moment things got very real for Keir Starmer ahead of tomorrow's NATO summit? We'll be asking how he'll fare on the world stage. Hello, welcome back. Well, in France tonight, chaos piles on drama after the shock result in a parliamentary election which saw a surprise defeat of the far right amid a leftist surge. President Macron today refused to accept the resignation of his Prime Minister, instead urging him to stay on for the sake of stability. Well, the full results of the second round of the election have now been confirmed, so we can take you through them in a bit more detail. So, the left-wing coalition, known as the New Popular Front, led by this man, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, came first with 180 seats. President Macron's centrist Ensemble came next. They got 159 seats for Macron's party. And despite winning the first round, Marine Le Pen's National Rally came third with 143 seats. Well, our international affairs editor Dominic Wagthorne is in Paris for us. Dominic, it was a bit of a surprise.
It was a huge surprise. I don't think anybody predicted what happened last night. I think it was accepted amongst most people that the far-right party, the National Rally, would not repeat the success it made in the first round of the elections and would not achieve the outright majority it so desperately wanted. But I think almost everybody expected it to still be the biggest party in the parliament. It was outmanoeuvred by a blocking manoeuvre by pretty much all its rivals across the political spectrum in France, the Republican Front, as it's called. And that it's repeated what it's done in the past, which is kind of running against the National Rally and kind of neutralising its threat. But I don't think anybody expected the left-wing coalition to lead and Macron's Ensemble party to come second. So now the dust is settling, Sophie. I think people are now trying to work out how big a gamble it was, how big a failure it was by Macron, or did it actually vindicate what he did, taking this extraordinary gamble to call these unnecessary snap elections in the wake of the far-right's success in the European elections. There are those who are saying that actually it's not so big a crisis. They're saying that de Gaulle's Fifth Republic constitution is designed to kind of absorb these crises. It was based on the premise that the French are a fractious lot. They are so riven with squabbling, they need a very strong president. And the president has extraordinary powers. Conceivably, Emmanuel Macron could continue until he leaves office in 2027, ruling by decree and using some kind of place person as Prime Minister, pretty much as he has done since he lost his parliamentary majority, his party's majority, in 2022. So they would say plus ça change, but I think the majority of analysts are saying no, it was a big mistake. It was a gamble that has backfired, and what it's going to lead to is a huge amount of chaos and gridlock and a very difficult situation here politically. And I think the big concern amongst those critics of Macron is that because this gamble has backfired, and if he does try and rule by edict, those extremists, the far right and also the extremists on the left, are going to be even more strengthened, because their supporters will say, look what happens when you vote for your party. It's the outcome is stitched up by the rest of the establishment. They will be furious over the next 2.5 years watching a president using presidential edict, a man they call Jupiter, ruling on high, overriding and not listening to the will of the people as expressed through these elections. And therefore, when we come around to presidential elections in 2027, the far right could be even stronger. So we'll have to wait and see what happens then. I think what we are guaranteed to see now in French politics for weeks, months, possibly years to come, is political turmoil as the French president and his parliament kind of now grapple with what is effectively uncharted territory.
Dominic, thank you very much indeed. Dominic Wagthorne there for us in Paris. And at 9 p.m, there's a special edition of The World with Yalda Hakim from Paris, with all the latest on the fallout from those French elections. That's 9 p.m. here on Sky News. Right, let's chat to our duo a bit more, shall we? Sayeeda Warsi and Jim Murphy. Sayeeda, what do you make of the French election result?
Well, we were just trying to work out the complications of it, weren't we, as to when the president's term comes to an end and how this kind of impacts on the presidential term. I mean, first of all, look, relief. You know, for me personally, relief from the UK's perspective, relief that Keir Starmer hopefully will not have to deal with Marine Le Pen in France, especially at a time when immigration and our relationship with Europe is going to be a big aspect of that. I think it'll be a good place for him to go into either a centrist or a centre-left government. From a personal perspective, relief, because if you look at what the far right across the whole of Europe, but particularly in France, have been doing, their whole kind of agenda has been anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim particularly, and as somebody who is Muslim, you know, I find that deeply troubling, this kind of rise of the far right, which particularly seems to be targeting an ethnic group of which I am a part. So I think, you know, let's start with the good news. it could have been worse. Let's now move on to the bad news, which is how they're going to get their act together.
Mm-hmm. And it matters for the UK as well, right?
Of course it does. This is a gamble that may just pay off for Macron. Everyone thought he'd lost his senses when he rolled the dice on this gamble. But here we have the Front National coming third rather than first, as everyone expected. Macron's going to work very hard, I think, over the next 48 hours in trying to split that left coalition and try to say to that, there's three main parties in that left coalition, and I think he'll try and pick off two of them and actually try to continue to govern from the centre and the centre-left. But it does matter to the UK. Here we have Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper saying we're going to smash the gangs that are bringing these people across in boats. And of course, we all want to see legal migration to the United Kingdom. But there's got to be action on this, and that requires really close cooperation between the UK and the French government, and a French government led by elements which are fascist would not be conducive to partnership working between the UK and France.
Yeah, it's that relationship that's really important. It does feel like it's slightly broken down, doesn't it?
I mean, the relationship between Europe and the United Kingdom, I think, has been broken in some ways since Brexit. There's no doubt about that. And I don't think that my party have necessarily helped with some of the rhetoric in rebuilding that relationship. So I think it starts, first of all, with language. And I think it's good to see Keir using the right kind of language to say this is about partnerships and building those partnerships. We've seen the same from the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. It now has to now translate into action. And I think, like Jim has said, it's much harder to translate that into action when you're dealing with political parties who are ideologically so far removed from the centre-left ground. And this is therefore good news.
So maybe relief, not just for you, but also for Keir Starmer.
The relationship between the UK and France is the closest in Europe. It's defence, it's economy, it's diplomacy. They're the two powers in Europe with a global reach, both in the P5 Security Council. So this relationship has to work, particularly if Trump's in power.
Thank you. Really interesting conversation. Still to come on the Politics Hub.
This is the White House Situation Room, heading to connect Prime Minister Starmer to President Biden. You are now connected to Air Force One.
OK, thank you.
Was this a moment that winning the top job hit home for Keir Starmer? We're talking about how he'll fare on the world stage. That's next.
Coming up on the UK tonight, housing, health and the economy all appear to be priorities for Sir Keir Starmer at the beginning of his first full week in the job. But we'll also speak to a former head of the prison service on the dire state of the UK's jails. Plus, we'll hear the England football fans making a dash for Dortmund ahead of the Three Lions Euro semi-final on Wednesday. All that and much more on the UK tonight at 8 o'clock.
There's a likelihood there will be more wildfires in Greece this summer. I mean, you know, that's a fact. If you're going there, there is a chance you may experience them. I suppose the reassurance is that following last summer, and of course, you know, really dreadful fires and huge consequences on holiday makers, the Greek authorities have ramped up their wildfire reaction. So they've doubled the firefighting force. They've got water-dropping planes, drones. I think tour operators are probably better prepared now. They've got better systems in place. You know, and it's just down to us as holidaymakers really to support that, to have the apps, to be, you know, to listen to advice and just to be a little bit more aware. And there was a very dry, very mild winter, and then, as you say, drought in June, really strong winds. It's effectively a tinderbox out there. So although I spoke to somebody in Crete yesterday and they said it's actually quite humid at the moment. So, you know, obviously the weather is a changing situation. It is a good idea to travel with a tour operator or book with a travel agent. You have that added support when you're out there. You know, if it does escalate and there is a wildfire and you do need to be repatriated or you know, worst case scenario, you've got all that protection there. If you are travelling independently, great, just make sure you've read your travel insurance policy, you're covered for extreme weather, and you know, just keep your fingers crossed.
I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's chief North of England correspondent. We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
Hello, welcome back. Well, this man, Keir Starmer, has had a busy first few days in office. Vic hasn't even moved the kids into Downing Street yet, but tomorrow he's off to NATO in his first test on the world stage, and all the signs are that he's set to receive a warm welcome on his first day in the job. He took a call, as you can see there, from President Biden, who congratulated him on a hell of a victory and said he looked forward to strengthening the special relationship.
This is the White House Situation Room, heading to connect Prime Minister Starmer to President Biden. You are now connected to Air Force One.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, congratulations. What a hell of a victory. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's been a long night and day. Fortuitously, we will see each other next week. I'm very much looking forward to seeing you in Washington and having the opportunity, obviously, to sit down properly.
I'm looking forward to it as well. There's no doubt that under your leadership, our two countries are going to continue our special relationship.
And for the last time this evening, we can bring in our duo for tonight, Saeed Avasi and Jim Murphy. Jim, I love that call. That's something, it does feel like the enormity of it is suddenly sinking in. He's like, I'm here, I'm on number 10 on the phone to the US President.
I don't know when Keir's slept since last Thursday, but he looks well. Look, international politics will take up a disproportionate amount of Keir's time. It just does. Global events have an ability to call on you uninvited, whether it's an international election or a terrible event. The world comes knocking when you're Prime Minister. But the question is, how will Keir respond? I think he'll do it in a pretty measured way. He won't panic. He'll be responsive. Obviously, he'll put the national interest first. And I think on the world stage, people will welcome the stability that he offers, because after the sort of relative turmoil of the post-Brexit Britain, and where the UK was so focused on arguing with itself, there is an opportunity to look outwards, which is why the new Defence Secretary was in Ukraine, as Saida said earlier, and the new Foreign Secretary's travelled across Europe over the weekend.
I guess, though, the other leaders make a big difference, don't they, as well, Saida? You can only build relationships with people that you have things in common with.
But people also take you seriously if they think you're coming from a position of strength. And so early on in a new election, so early on with a huge majority, so early on where people will be saying, well, this guy's going to be around for 5 years now, and he's got a huge majority in Parliament. I think people will take him seriously for that.
That's interesting, actually.
And so I think automatically that, I mean, one of the things you can say, you can see from that photograph, can't you, that the office suits him. You know, I've had my doubts about Keir, right? There've been moments when I've spoken to Labour colleagues and said, really, gosh, this is the best you're going to get. He just doesn't inspire me. I don't know what he stands for. You know, there were all sorts of question marks that I had. But actually, he seems to have suddenly won that election and then grown.
Would you be tempted to vote for him then?
I don't have a vote. I mean,
That's great.
I never have to pin my colours to the mast.
Yeah, brilliant. I always thought when Boris Johnson and him were up against one another, remember Boris Johnson?
Yeah.
I always thought the two of them were in the wrong job. I thought Keir Starmer was pretty ill-suited to be leader of the opposition, and I always thought Boris Johnson was completely ill-suited to be leader of the governing party. I think Keir will be a much better Prime Minister than he was leader of the opposition. And I'm not advocating Boris Johnson to return, but I just think his persona, the show-off, sparky, devil-may-care attitude is more suited to the Punch and Judy politics of Westminster. The final thing is I think that Keir will face his first PMQs shortly, and I think that's an opportunity for him to instil his personality in the whole chamber. They say, look, if you want theatre, go to the West End. If you want serious conversation, come to Parliament.
Who's he going to be up against? Rishi Sunak still?
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to be...
and you know, I just think, you know, it's a really, really tough job for Rishi to keep doing, you know, when he's just lost this huge election.
Yeah.
Which is why I think Keir getting the tone right is important, but Rishi getting the tone right, understanding that the electorate have spoken and being gracious in that is important.
It's a tough act, like you say. Thanks both very much indeed, and thanks for watching as well. We'll see you tomorrow at 7.